Excuse me, what do you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion? Northumberland Public Library presents Continuing the Conversation.
At the high school, there was a range from the students of how they felt about diversity, equity, inclusion, or the way it should be.
It doesn't have to be. We were saying the stuff that he's been doing with the program he's in is, they say DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the stuff I've been reading says EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I don't think it matters. They're all the same words. They're just in a different order. How do you think EDI fits into your current life situation?
Well, since I'm at UVA, at least for the next semester, it's always been something that they focus on there. So if you like a lot of the trainings we had to do going into UVA as first years, focused on recognizing implicit biases, which has to do with actually all three of those aspects. Probably more of an inclusion than anything, but with all three. Just recognizing that not only because of where you're from, that you have your own experiences, but recognizing that the way you view others may be different based on where you're from or how you were raised. And that's with, like I said, that's with gender, that's with geographic differences, that's with race, that's with sexual orientation, religion differences, and things like that. So it's always, and as an RA, then it's also my job to also, since I'm a resident advisor, the people who are living in my dorm, I have to communicate that to them as well. It's part of our task. So that's how it's affected me. I think the other way it's affected me is just in the political sphere. People have confused diversity, equity, inclusion, or any type of like equity training or focus with critical race theory. And so, politically, if teachers are doing any type of inclusion training, there may be some parents, there may be some students who take that as learning about, how about racism and about how one group of people should be demonized and another group of people should be taken care of more in a different way. Mm-hmm. And in a sense, you are learning about different types of like divides that exist in the country, but it's not critical race theory, and it's not something that people should be fearful of. The first African-American principal of a big high school in Texas, was recently suspended and then fired in part because he attended one of these trainings. And he was accused of propagating critical race theory, in part because he participated in these type of trainings, right? So, and that only affects him, that affects the kids who liked him and spoke up for him, that affects his family because he has to find a new job. So that scares me, the fact that even talking about this could cost you your job with new laws coming into effect, trying to ban these types of things. But so I guess that's the other way, just politically, since I like politics and involved with it. That's the other way it's affected.
I'm actually going to ask about politics in a couple of minutes, so we'll get back to that. Yeah. So how important is community to you? Michael, I'll go with you first. How important is community to you?
Everything centers around community, and what that means in different aspects, because community could be like, your teachers, or community could just be you and your friends hanging out. It's just a group of people with something in common. The common denominator anywhere you go is community. Your job, you guys are all there. Like at the library, you guys' common goal and mission is like to do what's best for the library and to see how the library can best service the community. And at school, administrators and teachers and staff, their common denominator is how can we best service students. So everything goes back to community, and I think that should be more intentionally paid attention to, into how we can like more intentionally cultivate community, be in communication with each other. Because I feel like a lot of the time it just goes kind of like, oh, we go to school, this is just something we do. And we should have more sit downs and talks like this.
Yes, I would like that. Definitely. What about you?
Yeah, no, I agree with Michael. You know, when you're at school, you go to school more than just to learn. Should be, or at least you should be able to find a community there that you can do more than just study with. Whether that's eating lunch with them or playing sports with them and things like that. Those things matter a lot for your mental well-being, because the school does much more than teach kids. It cultivates them as human beings. And so that's the case for a lot of different places, like the library. You'll find good community at the library. If there's someone who just loves a kid who just loves the library, they know more than just reading there. They may know the librarian and they have good community with them. Another part about community that's important to at least recognize when you're building communities is, theoretically, communities also not only are defined by like who's a part of the community, but who's not a part of the community. So communities are purposely made sometimes to distinguish yourself from a larger group or larger population. So, if there's a friend group of students at a school, they're purposely distinguished from the teachers or the administrators. And so that's a good thing. I guess where it becomes bad is where if you take that exclusion to heart, and therefore you're not open to bringing other new people or new perspectives into the community. So if you have a case where someone makes a community, amongst the people they live, and then you have someone new who wants to join or does come into that community, you have to be conscious of the fact that some new ideas will be introduced or some new situations may be introduced. And you have to be intentional if you want to create a truly inclusive community and doing that. That's difficult because, like, just one example where it's difficult is at UVA, we have Christian fellowships, and there's some Christian fellowships who, in their doctrinal teachings, they don't want people who are doing certain things like within the fellowship, or at least the leadership of the fellowship. So there was someone who was pushed out because they were homosexual. And so in the argument they were making is that, okay, if you had like a political group like the college Republicans, would it make sense for them to want to keep someone who's a progressive Democrat in their leadership structure? So there's some communities where it's hard to think about whether or not you include certain groups of perspectives, because it could, in the minds, at least in the minds of people who are part of the community, could diminish the purpose of the community in the first place, right? So it's something to contend with, but it's something we should at least think about. Like, you shouldn't shun out new ideas because, we at least have to think about these things. It's important.
What about you, Arthur?
I find that community is fragmented. As you were mentioning, we were talking about it. We all have our ideology of who we hang out with. When we were in school, we had a certain group of people that we hung out with. And you see it in the movies too. So it's life imitating art. You had the mean girls, and they got along just fine. You had the nerds, and they hang out with the nerds. You had, in fact, when I was growing up, you had the preps, the jocks, the geeks and nerds. And then there was this group of people that you didn't know what to do with them. But they kind of worked their way through that. In Garfield High School, though, these groups found it hard to coincide with one another. And it just set the stage for later life. So when I entered 9th grade at Garfield High School, they were having riots in the bus tunnel, racial riots, black versus white. And once that settled down, the next thing you know, you heard the riots from the freaks and the jocks. So in the tunnels, the situation was a hotbed, and you would get off the bus and they would tell you or say, if you are found in the bus tunnel when the authorities arrive, the action that will be taken will be serious, up to being expelled. So when you exit the bus, please report to your home room as soon as possible. That was the announcement every morning. And then when the freaks and jocks had finally worked out their thing, the preps got mad and said, hey, wait, we didn't get our chance to work out our problems, But I think by the time I got to my 11th grade year and was pretty much a couple of months in, all of that had been quieted down. So we could get off the bus. We didn't hear that announcement. You could hang out in the bus tunnel and talk when you first get off the bus before your homework class. So we found even today that our communities are fragmented. And politics, which we will get to in a minute, has done their fair share of that fragmenting and picking it apart. But also special interest groups. Special interest groups have done their share of that fragmenting. But community is much more than my ideas or your ideas. Community should be, we all got to find a way to coincide, which was the reason why I found myself in Northern Nick.
I was curious, what do you think changed in your high school that helped to calm down a bit? Right.
Well, first of all, the hard line that the school took.
Okay.
Do you want to be expelled or do you want to be in school?
Yeah.
And there was a lot of children that got expelled. And that didn't mean that there was no more school. There was a lot of time we didn't know about it, but there was a facility. They were like mobile homes, but it was a facility where these children who were problem children, that's where their education took place.
Okay.
So you got taken out of general population and put in isolation. And those kids didn't look too happy.
Which they say that does not work. So,
but it took away the problem inside the school of the kids that were, because I went to learn and I wanted to get to know people. But my main source for school was to learn.
Well, you were in a very large school, obviously, if you had a bus tunnel.
Yeah, I had no idea what that was.
Yeah,
I've
like,
heard of a bus tunnel.
me neither.
Yeah, man.
I was like, wow, I must have been in a really small school because we didn't have a bus tunnel.
Yeah.
We just had they dropped you off at the front of the school and you walked inside, you know?
We had the bus
So,
loop.
The bus loop, yeah,
The
that's
bus
what we
loop,
had.
Yeah.
We can have down there. That's right. So the next question is, how important is politics to you? And that was another question that ranked right up there with community.
Yeah.
I mean, politics and community play a large part of each other. They are intertwined, definitely.
Yeah.
So we just went through an election here in the fall where we kept the same supervisors. We kept the same, kept the same everything except for school board. We got a new school board member.
Yeah.
But in a small community like this, politics plays a huge part of community. So how does that affect you?
We know this is a political major over here.
No.
That's right. So let's ask Michael, what do you think?
Politics, I think in small communities, like you said, politics they take a different form, and their importance it's a bit different because nepotism is a big thing here. And I think that's why the wealth is locked in the communities. You know, the families here that have been making money are still making money. And not that that's bad, but you know, you see there's not a good distribution of the wealth. And that has been a remaining thing. And a lot of that I think is political. Not directly, but maybe indirectly. You know, checks and balances and making sure people are voting too here. It's very hard. I was helping with Blizzard's campaign, and it was just really hard just like getting people to open the door and just like talk.
It's true.
But as far,
it's even harder.
Yeah, it was really hard, all of that. But as far as like personal direct life, I think I would have to more go into I would have to see more how that would I would have to go and see like what codes are being written by the board of supervisors or like ordinances, which I haven't looked into, honestly. But I'm sure I could find a way where it directly like influences my everyday, especially like the school board.
Trust me when I say that they haven't been updated in a long time.
I believe it.
School board does better with that than the county does. Let's talk a little bit about race and how that factors into your life, and how much does it play a factor in your lives and the decisions that you make and EDI in your lives.
Now, before y'all answer or get started with that, let me tell you what happened with when we were in school. And I'm just going to read this. The question varied based on the color of the teen's skin. If you were of a darker complexion, race was more of a common factor in your daily life. On the other hand, other side of the spectrum, if you are white or Caucasian race, it was not a major factor that you considered. And that's what talking with the 25 individuals that I talked with. If you were white, in fact, Mikkel was with me, and it was two other people. One girl was a white girl, Mikkel, and then there's a black girl with Mikkel. And the white girl said, "No, doesn't not factor much in my life." And Mikkel and the other girl was like, "Oh, it's a big factor in our lives." And it was just amazing that it's the skin color or the color of your skin was a huge factor as to whether race was a factor in your life.
Michael?
Yeah.
Well, I think that, you know, Black people they have to be more conscious of race because, you know, that's just been sewn into our DNA, you know, over time. You know, not that Black people aren't just sitting around every day contemplating the fact that they're Black, you know, but it is something that is always kind of there, you know, where when you walk into a room and you're the only Black person, or you know, certain things are a bit more sensitive to you because of your background, or and I don't know the white American perspective of it. Maybe white people don't need to think about race as much because they can move, you know, through spaces without thinking about it as much, whereas we kind of have to.
See, I usually tie in gender when I'm thinking of the fact that I'm a woman. And like when I was in the pharmaceutical industry, I was the minority. It was white men. It was white men. So when I walked into a room as a district manager in pharmaceutical industry, people looked because I was a white woman, and that didn't happen. So if I was to substitute this, I'd say how much is gender a factor? But I don't have to think about my race, but I should. You know what? I really should, because in some ways that is important, but I don't have to deal with it like other people do who are not white American. Even Asians. I mean, it's for all other races in the United States, it is an issue.
Yeah.
Denza?
Well, one thing I wanted to mention that I wanted to mention earlier is just about the community here. Something that was a big part of the community in the past, but isn't now, is like church and religion in general. And that and when you had church, you had the opportunity for someone to go to a structured environment where they saw how the community interacted. And they had the ability to spiritually connect with others in that room. And that's something that has been lost, not only because of the pandemic, but over the years. Yes. The congregations are growing older and older, and you don't have younger folks in there, and even older folks are choosing not to go.
That's true.
And that's a larger conversation for a different day, but I just wanted to mention that. And that also has something to do with the politics. But yeah, when it comes to race, I agree with Michael and you. And what the author found when he was talking to other students is that you do have this case where it's hard to have a conversation about it, because if you're having a conversation between someone who's white and someone who's Black, then obviously the person who's white, they really don't, in their mind, they don't see any benefit from having the conversation. In many ways, it's true. It's not that they're going to lose anything from a system where people who are a different color than them are the ones who are losing out, and they may be benefiting in some way. Or at the worst, nothing is happening to their current situation. So they don't see any reason to engage in the conversation. I think what's important, first, how it's affected my life, it's not like Michael said that I sit around and think about race just for when I'm casually doing something or sitting in my home. I do think about it more than others. I think maybe because of what my studies and things like that, but it's not something that I don't think about. You do notice it in situations where you may be the only person of a race in a room. As you said, if you're the only person of a gender in a room, your characteristic becomes potent when it's unique. So there's like instances when it does become something that matters. So it may be, if I were to walk into a room of 3-year-olds, I would obviously recognize my age. I wouldn't recognize my age if I was, well, I haven't, not even today, for example, because I'm sitting with all adults. It becomes potent. So if a white person were to walk into a room full of Black people, they may consider it more. That's the way it affects me. I think the other way it affects me, and this connects to the other point I was going to make, is that it is frustrating that because of the color of my skin, there is a possibility that I may be treated differently. And it's not that I blame every single white person for the historical wrongs that have been done to people who look like me, or even for the current wrongs that have been done, because every single white person is responsible for them. Where the problem comes is that if my concerns are dismissed simply because the other person doesn't feel like I was saying earlier, they benefit from recognizing. An important part of community, like I said earlier, is in a way being empathetic to those who may have different experiences than me. And it does get frustrating, and it's quite sad. You feel like there's nothing you can do about it because you have the skin color you have. It was given to you by God and you can't change it. And then it's hard to change people's mind because they have the skin color they have. It's given to them by God and they can't change it. And therefore that affects their mindset towards it. So it's frustrating in a sense, but me, and this isn't every single African American, that has led me to kind of focus the work I do on race in a sense, not only on race, but it's something that I do I feel obligated to think about, to fix in any profession I may end up in. That is a good thing in a sense because it gives you some sort of motivation. So I think that's how it has affected me personally.
I really like what you said. An important part of the community is being empathetic to others who are different than you. I really like that. That's so important. And I think that we've lost sight of that big time. So at least I have. So I tend to. I forget that I get this tunnel, like I have to go this way, when in reality I don't. I can go this way, but it's very hard to do. Yeah. So because we've been raised to be a certain way, and so you have to look past everything else. I really like that. I'm going to borrow that if you don't mind, because I really like that phrase.
Just to follow up on that, it's what we have to learn, and it's going to be a long road because this has been around for years.
Oh, yeah.
And things are changing, and that's the one thing that we have to understand. It has changed. Look, when I was a 5-year-old boy in Culpeper, Virginia, if a white person was approaching us on the sidewalk, we had crossed the street and continued on our way. That was the norm. I don't have to worry about that now. It's been a long time since I've worried about, oh, there comes a white person, let me move over to the other side of the street. Whatever reason that was taught, I don't even remember. I just remembered that I was supposed to move to the other side of the street. Maybe it was to not cause any problems. I was born in 1967. By that time, 5 years old, it's 1972, right?
Yeah.
So it's not that many years off from the great Martin Luther King speeches, right?
Right.
It's not too far off from that. But we have changed. Things have changed. Now, inside, some of those individuals that are still stuck in the past, maybe inside they still have some problem or an affected issue. But I can tell you what my father told me, and he did not have a high school education, but he says, let them judge you by what you do, not by who you are on the outside, but by what you do. And of course, that's just a part of it, because he always thought, work hard, get a job, work hard, take care of your family. That's how you'll be judged. Of course, there's more to it. And my father, if he had had all of the education, probably would have recognized that there's more to it, because you can help others, you can change others. But it has changed, and that's what we need to remember.
Yeah, especially since that those people who lived during that time, or like directly after it, like when you were born, they do make up not a majority of the population, but they make up a large chunk of the population. So they're still here. And like you said, I think it is important to recognize that progress has been made. I don't think there's enough recognition of that. And I think that sometimes you can develop a mentality where if you don't recognize progress has been made, or that there are avenues for you to do well, you can develop a mentality where you give up altogether because you think that, there's no space for me, there's no opportunity for me, things like that. So that's very dangerous, where you develop this mentality where you're consistently and always a victim. And that does disgruntle a lot of older folks, Black and white, because they say, well, no, there's a way you can make it. Things are much easier for you now. I guess on the flip side, though, there is a motivation by younger people to continue making changes. And they recognize that it's important because, you have someone like Tim Scott, Republican senator from South Carolina, who was pulled over on his way to the Capitol to cast a vote. This is someone who essentially has made it. He's one of only 3 African-American senators in the Senate. He has made it to a pretty high level. He has accomplished a lot. I'm sure he's taking care of his family. And, that still didn't deter a cop from pulling him over unnecessarily. There is a recognition that now that in the past you knew that, okay, you weren't supposed to use this water fountain, or you weren't supposed to go to this bathroom, or maybe you were supposed to cross the street. And so these things were there and you knew of them. It was the way the world worked. But now it's the case where it's these unexpected instances that scare you the most because they're unexpected. And where now, okay, I know I can use any bathroom. I know I can drink from a water fountain, but what happens if I look at a police officer this way? What happens if, I'm running down the street and there's like a white woman by herself and she gets so scared that I'm running that she calls the police on me. He's like, and you can't prepare for those situations because they're not structured in the sense that they are consistent, but they're structural in the sense that they're embedded in the system. And the only way you find them is when you're in that bad situation. Mm-hmm. It's hard to escape it. Mm-hmm. And this inescapable loop is something that scares young people so much that it motivates them to want to have more systemic changes, mm-hmm. to push even more, to get people to recognize that this is our history. Not only do we have to confront it, but we should make it and change in the future for the better. And so I think if there was more of a recognition of the work that our forefathers have done, and more of a recognition that we stand on the shoulder of giants, then there would be more cohesion between these two different groups. The younger and older generational divide wouldn't be there, but that's something to be worked on.
Well, we seem to be wanting to get rid of all of our giants, which is really sad.
That's true.
We want to get rid of all of our giants who made some huge strides for us because we don't like something that they said now. So we just, well, that one doesn't count anymore, So that's a problem too. And you also made me think of the fact that even though we have all these changes that we're trying to put in place and we're trying to do better, it all boils down to education. If people are educated, the fact that the color of your skin makes no difference, whether you're running toward me, we all have that fight or flight instinct right away. So of course that white woman that you're running toward, would she be just as afraid if it was a white man that was running toward her as well? Yeah. And that it's an education thing. It's like not all people are bad, but we've been taught that all people are bad, inherently bad, and until we see the good in them. And that's sad, mm-hmm. but that's the way our society has become. And so we're all afraid, and we shouldn't be, because that's not really what God intended for this world. So I feel bad for that white woman, but maybe she needs to sit down on the bench and just wait till he goes by, Sorry, just my thoughts. But I totally get what you're saying. Yeah. And so let's move on and talk sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to touch on the education thing too. Mm-hmm. Something that's really a big thing is how Black history is taught. Yes. And it's white history, white American history is taught objectively. Rather George Washington had slave teeth in his mouth or not, I still learned who he was and what he did and what he contributed to this country.
Right.
There's a large portion of Black history that just isn't taught. And it isn't taught, and we aren't even taught it to be able to discern and pick from it what was useful and what wasn't. I should still learn about, things that I've grown to learn about myself, just, reading and things, but I never hear about like that whole Black Power movement. And I can't help but feel that's intentional.
Yeah.
Because Stokely Carmichael and Angela Davis and Marcus Garvey, and like you said, giants, some of their philosophies might not have been the most constructive, but what they did add is still very important. History is important because it adds context to where you are, and it helps you see where you're going as a people. And if we don't know that, there's like so many like big movers, like Black thinkers, the Harlem Renaissance, and how that those writers, Lorraine Hansberry and Zora Neale Hurst, Elaine Locke, those thinkers even influenced a whole movement that I've been reading about in France. It was called like Negritude or something like that. And it was just this like revolution of like Black thought and what it meant to be Black and what it meant to like move through the world, not just in America as Black, but in the world, because race it isn't just an American problem. It's a world problem, and that goes into like colonialism and imperialism and class and a whole another discussion of things. But that education is important.
Yep, it's very true. So what are some ways that we can make sure that we, and I'm talking individually, are EDI compliant? How do we as individuals make sure that we are practicing equity, diversity, and inclusion?
Education.
Okay.
And intentionally going out of our way, give real authority to people that understand that background.
I agree that education is important, as you said, Jane and Michael said. Education doesn't only have to occur in school, though. I think it is important in school because, like Michael said, if you are African American growing up and you do not hear about the accomplishments of people from your community, then that can also play a factor in you not thinking that you can accomplish something. If you only hear about people of a certain race have accomplished these things. So there's justifiably a lot of discussion occurring about taking down certain statues and changing names of white people in American history, but there's not enough conversation about the fact that African Americans or people of a different race or a different ethnicity who have contributed to the country never even had a chance to have a statue or some type of history written about them that you would read about in school or that you would know about publicly. That is very important. You also, you're in school a good amount of months out of the year, a good amount of hours in the day, but you also have your family at home. You have public forums you may go to, like a church and things like that. And these are places that also have an influence on your thinking, whether it's diversity, equity, inclusion, or anything of that matter.
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be more than just education in the schoolhouse. And I think that, as I was saying before, is something that was important to rural areas, especially the older generation of African Americans in general, and not just in rural areas, was the church. Mm-hmm. It was a theology of empowerment and a theology of recognizing that you have a personal connection with a divine savior who wasn't just a human who came to earth, but was literally someone who was an embodiment of God and taught us what we need to do in order to create the loving and humane earth that God intended to create. Mm. And so you've kind of lost that, and you have this idea now where people say that, okay, all morals or all ideas of how you think of the world are relative, and that it's more of a liberal idea, not liberal in the sense that we use it now, but liberal in the sense that liberalism as it grew out of the revolutionary era, where you have people separating church and state, and that your ideas, as long as you have the basic fundamental human rights, your ideas are your own. And if there's a majority group that has these ideas, that's the idea, and that's the way you should be governed. I just wanted to make that distinction. I'm not talking about liberal in the sense that we use it now, but the revolutionary liberalism, where you have all ideas of moralism and all ideas of what you think are right and wrong are relative. And so now you have the case where, okay, if you say it's relative, then you have to accept the fact that there were a group of people in 1930s Germany who thought you should eradicate all Jews.
Mhm.
They thought it was right, you thought it was wrong, but if you say all ideas are relative, you don't have the same basic moral foundation, then you can't say they're wrong, because if all ideas are relative and they think they're right, then that's how things should be, right?
Mhm.
So whether you think it should be done through religion or not, I think what we have to have is the same basic moral foundations. For one, the acceptance of facts over lies, truth over lies is something that's been a big thing now. The acceptance of others as people who are more like you than they are unlike you, not like you. Recognizing that money and power aren't what make you happy and aren't what fulfill you, but it's something even deeper, which is something a lot of people recognize over the pandemic when they lost their money and their power and they were looking for some type of internal fulfillment. These are all things that historically have been taught by the church.
Yep.
It doesn't mean that it has to continue to be that way, but when you lose that form, or you lose faith in that form for justifiable reasons, then you lose the same basic moral foundation within your community. And therefore, this is where you get a lot of the schisms and problems, because if all ideas are relative, then you just deal with it, essentially.
And if we're taking God out of everything, which we're trying to,
Yeah,
not me, but people are, that makes it even harder.
it does make it difficult. It makes it difficult because even hearing the word God is not something that would be a good conversation starter for some people.
Mhm.
And it's, like I said, there's justifiable reasons to recognize that the church has been complacent. The church in many ways has been an active participant in some of the problems that we've discussed today. Even to this day, you have a large group of evangelicals who are very complicit and participate in the systemic injustices that we talk about. But you also have the case that, and comes back to recognizing the giants that came before us, you have the case that the groups that spoke out and gained many of the civil rights that changed things from my time that weren't the same in Arthur's time were the African American church. The groups of African Americans who abolished slavery were people who believed in the gospel, and they used it to benefit them. Nat Turner was a preacher. He led the largest slave revolt in the United States that arguably changed the course of the abolition movement, because he killed so many white people in one night. And not that I agree with the way he did it, but it's history and that's the way it happened.
Yeah, but nobody talks about that history.
But nobody talks about
Right,
that, right?
right.
So you have this misunderstanding of what a good moral foundation can do. It is something that is a larger conversation that needs to be had, but it does need to be had. That's the point.
Mhm.
And if you take the same way if you take race out of history, you miss racism, and you miss the potential of people of different races doing great things. If you take God out of history, you miss what it is that people who have believed in God have done, both good and bad. The moral foundations are something that are just as important as teaching about race, gender, and things of that nature. But I think the second thing, I know that was long, but the second thing is that we need to recognize that, for me, for example, that there are biases that I have, even though I'm African American. Just because I'm African American doesn't mean that I don't perpetuate other types of problems we have in society. We have things like sexism, and I've had to recognize at UVA, it's been good. It's helped me recognize the ways in which I perpetuate that. I have a misunderstanding, going into UVA, I had a misunderstanding of other ethnic cultures, of other religions that I've never interacted with at Northumberland.
Mhm.
If we recognize that we ourselves have this, and this comes back to Christianity, but we ourselves have our own faults.
Mhm.
It makes us much more empathetic when it comes to recognizing the faults of others.
Mhm.
And it's through that empathy that progress can be made. And so it's hard for me to articulate that without recognizing that I wasn't taught this on my own, but through understanding the faith of Christianity and the Gospels. But there is a way to do it. Yeah, it's just hard to tell people that what they think will fulfill them won't.
I have a T-shirt that says "Empathy Matters,"
Yeah.
and I wear it a lot at
Yeah.
home. I don't wear T-shirts out, but at home. And my husband's like, "Where'd you get that shirt?" And it's actually from training that I did with a guy who works with homeless people. And he talks all the time about, you can you can enforce all the rules you want, but empathy is so important, especially for people who have no home and have lived on the streets for years and years and years. But it applies to everyone,
Yeah.
you know, because we're all different. We're all different.
I just have to say, Miss Blue and Mr. Arthur, you guys are like doing some really, really good work. And this is I just love this. I'm in love with this. And I think this is a sharing space, and that sharing of course, again, piggybacking off of Denzel, just that sharing of ideas and experiences. And as you guys do more of this, and we do more of this together, that will happen. And, you know, and in that back and forth, we'll have ideas of things to do. You guys will have ideas, and that will push forward that rebranding process.
Thanks, Michael. Kind of a switcheroo here. We're going to talk about name 3 of the most important concerns you face. Keep in mind, we're still talking about EDI, but
Yeah.
or DEI, whichever.
One of the biggest concerns I face, I've been going, every time I come home, I go to, you know, the churches we would go to when I was here. What I've noticed is that there's very few people and they're all old in the church.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest concern I have, not only for Northumberland County, not only for this area, but for the country, is that such a large part of community, or was a large part of community throughout history. Like I said, the moral foundation is missing, and that concerns me. The second thing that concerns me is, and this is hard because I'm one of those people, is that people are too busy. You have this case where if there's, in a small community like this one, even in a large community, if there's someone who's very good at a lot of different things, they're very stretched thin, and they're not able to focus a lot of their work in different spaces or in one thing they're doing. But that also means that it's hard to get others involved. When you're so busy, you can't do something like give back to the community. You can't do something like sit on a library board. The community is really missing something. They're missing a person who would be so great to their well-being, the community's well-being. And so this busyness is something that scares me. It scares me not only because I see other people that are too busy, because I see myself as too busy and I'm missing opportunities to do things that would really give me some sense of fulfillment, other than good grades, which doesn't really give me a sense of fulfillment. I forget everything by the time I get to the next semester, unless I really cared about it. And then I think the third thing that concerns me is that just what I was saying, it connects to the busyness and connects to the lack of a good moral foundation, is that, and I think I recognize this, and I'm in a privileged position to recognize this because I don't struggle as you know with money and things of that nature, but that people see their fulfillment in things that are fleeting. It's important that we do assure people, or make sure that people have the basic necessities in life, and that we continue to have anti-poverty programs, whether they're publicly ran or privately ran. It's important that we do continue to provide for those in need, because so much of poverty is cyclical, where someone's not just sitting in poverty for a long period of time, but then they run into a hard situation, like the pandemic was an example of people who were perfectly fine, not perfectly fine, but were okay, but then the pandemic hit, they had an eviction. That's something that for a long period of time, groups of people were experiencing without the pandemic. And we only come to recognize that because of the pandemic as a nation. But I think that that's important, but in communities that don't have a lot, there's sometimes still a sense of joy, because they've learned that their fulfillment isn't going to come from what they don't have, but recognizing what they do have. And in particular, recognizing what they do have, the things that aren't destined to disappear one day. Like, I've never seen a U-Haul behind a hearse, right? And you've heard a lot of people say that. The things you have in life, the material, the physical things aren't going to fulfill you. You passing a certain law or getting a certain position in political power isn't what, it may put you in a good position to help people, but it isn't going to give you fulfillment. The only way these things, whether political power or money, will give you fulfillment is if you use them in a way that gives you fulfillment. Something that gives me fulfillment, you know, helping others, recognizing that, you know, because you have these things, you may have more time to spend with your family. seeing ways that you can put things in place for the environment of future generations, looking at arts and cultivating creativity. These are things that, as we've seen with this whole movement to cut out arts from schools because it puts a strain on the budget, these are things that we are prioritizing and we're suffering because of it. And I'm hoping that, you know, I'm very sad that a lot of people, including myself, have had to go through some of the mental struggles they have during the pandemic. But I'm hoping that will help people realize that there's something more fulfilling than the things we had before the pandemic that we don't have now. There's something more fulfilling, or at least you can make things more fulfilling. You can make your job more fulfilling if you recognize and focus on the things that don't ultimately disappear. And it scares me that people don't recognize that they're so driven by these things that aren't really real.
Right. That makes sense. Michael, what do you think?
Definitely exposure. And I think Denzel was talking about that. Arts and stuff like just getting out and seeing how different people live. And I think that's specifically important here for the young people. And that's something I'm pushing for, you know, as the student rep on the school board, is just more trips. If you're not in an honors program or at governor's school, they do not take us anywhere or show us anything.
Oh.
And, you know, and that's not, because I'm sure, you know, like anyone can remember, like, especially when you're a teen, there's like in like early adolescence, there's so many new things going on, you know, new ideas and new, you know, you can remember as a teenager that song you heard or that book you read or that line in that book that you read, and you just knew in that moment that, you know, there was something going on inside your head that was just totally shifting the way that you understand and move through the world. You know, whether that was a book, an art piece, a song, something you went and saw, a trip you and your family went on. That exposure is so important, and it's important in preparing us for transiency in it. And by that I mean just like, you know, like getting out. And of course I understand it's important that some of the young people stay here too. But, you know, like you said, that plays into jobs and just, you know, getting the talent back here to keep those ideas moving. But also, like, you know, we got to prepare the young people that are here that want to leave, and making sure they're not getting out and being in culture shock. And, you know, and some people get out of here, I've seen, and they come back here and they stay here with degrees that they can't even get jobs here with. And sometimes they get out and they cannot handle functioning outside of this rural ecosystem because it's just so hard. And that's something I think about too, as like somebody that wants to leave here and do things and then come back and get back.
You said you want to leave?
Yeah, yeah.
Leave permanently or leave to go to school and come back?
The things I want to do, I don't know currently if this place has the capacity. I do have a lot of regard and respect and reverence for this place, though. You know, being where I've gone to school here and stuff. But yeah, that exposure, getting us out more, and that exposure that makes that cultural shift happen. Like going to plays and like ballets and like chamber concerts and go hear some like live music and like some spoken word poetry. All of that stuff like is really transformative. Secondly, resources, the allocation therefore of, you know, resources. Like we were both money. You know, get to the bare bones of things, money, and then also as a resource of information, and, you know, who holds that information, because information in social currency is probably just as important as like actual money, because, you know, a lot of people get taken advantage of just because they do not know, and the person taking advantage of does know, and a lot of that goes on. A lot of that goes on between different communities, like my cousins and stuff that are girls, or like my mom. You know, you take a guy, with you to the car shop. So the auto guy doesn't try to like tell you that you need to pay this and that for this and that. A lot of that goes on different levels.
True here.
Exactly. And that goes on in so many different spaces. Just one person knowing something, and that person knows that that person doesn't know that. So they capitalize off of that. So information and allocating information, who knows what and who knows how to get what, is extremely important. And money, what scholarships are going on, things like that, preparation. And third,
Doesn't have to be a third thing.
yeah, I don't think I have a third thing.
So we've talked a lot today about EDI, and we've talked a lot today about what's important in this community, how we bring things back, how we rebrand. So we're all going to face injustices. It's a given in this world. And I still thinking about that lady worried about the man running down the street after.
It's a powerful analogy.
It is. It is for me.
It is.
So what scenario would cause you to take a stand against injustice? And think specifically about this community.
And you consider, most of the time we see injustice around us, and we sit and we know it's wrong. We'll even say it's wrong.
Yeah.
But what do we do about it?
Yeah.
How do we get involved? So
Besides talk about.
Except for talking about it. So
Kids and women being disserviced and taken advantage of.
What would you do?
Go to board meetings, go talk, be heard. Checks and balances is so important, because people do things because they know they can get away with them. So, watching closely, asking to see the budget, asking to see how these resources are being allocated, running for offices and putting people to the stand to say, what are you about and how are you going to lead these issues, and just calling people out, calling power out when it needs to be called out, and just talking and sharing. A lot happens in talking, and just sharing ideas and letting people know that young people are thinking about these things.
What do you think, Denzel? We're
Um,
back to the scenario. What would make you take a stand against injustice?
I see. That's a good question. I agree with Michael. I think, I know it's a little cliche to say this, but I agree that in the Northern Neck there is a problem with whether it's abuse or neglect of women and children, and that's something that does upset me, and that's something that needs to be addressed to the criminal justice system. So I had the opportunity, and it's a good opportunity to intern in the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, and with Jane and Aaron, and so to see what they are able to do on the legal side with that was great. But then I also think, once the person leaves the courtroom or goes to jail, there's a lack of reformative justice that's taken. And so that comes down to our people who are counselors. It comes down to our people who are skilled at communication with people who have committed atrocities, who have done something that's bad. So I agree. I think that's a big one in Northern Neck. The biggest injustice, I think that's something that has concerned me recently, though, is misinformation. Some misinformation, the way that the information ecosystem works, it works in a way that someone may spread misinformation because 30 people before them were the ones who initiated it. Unfortunately, sometimes it may be a foreign actor who is intentionally trying to sow distrust among people or amplify divisions that already exist. But misinformation is something I think about only because I'm thinking about lies about the integrity of our elections. That we're coming up on the anniversary of the first insurrection, the first attack on our Capitol in hundreds of years. that was very dangerous, not only because of that attack, but because the idea has continued to live among innocent people who watch certain media or see certain videos, and they're also affected by this misinformation. And it makes it hard to communicate with people who believe in things that are really conspiracy theories, because the way a conspiracy theory works is that there's always a justification for why you're right and always a justification for why the whole person is wrong. And so that, I think that's the biggest injustice, because you see the same thing with vaccines, you see the same thing with critical race theory. This misinformation affects people who are innocently looking for truth, and someone's telling them that this is the truth and it's really not, and that therefore affects their ability to interact with the public in general. And that puts us in a grave danger, because you have a case all across this country where unnecessary laws are being put in place, whether it has to do with critical race theory. Like I said, the African American principal being fired for attending, among other things, a diversity, equity, and inclusion training. You have a case where certain laws have been put in place where you can't give food and water to people who are selling in voting lines because they think it's going to cause more fraud.
Influence their vote.
Yeah, influence their vote, and also cause more people to vote fraudulently in some way. You have the case where, I mean, with the vaccine, you have the case where people who are vaccinated doing everything they can to protect themselves and protect others, but we keep having to go back into lockdowns, keep having to go back into situations where we're doing things through Zoom because there's another group of people who aren't as concerned about others because of misinformation. Because I talk to older people all the time, they say when the measles vaccine came out, people were lined up out of the door to get it because they saw the effects, and there
Same
wasn't.
with smallpox.
Yeah, smallpox, similar thing. And so this misinformation, I guess the great injustice is that it not only like can harm an innocent person because they believe that misinformation, but the people who are innocent in the sense that they don't believe this misinformation and are just simply just trying to vote, or simply just trying to get their business back up and running, or get Christmas presents for their kids, or people who are simply just trying to learn about the true history of America, good and bad, aren't given an opportunity to do any of those things because these people are propagating this misinformation.
So are we really free?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's another question for another
Yeah,
day.
that's another topic.
That was a whole article I
Yeah.
read this morning.
You start leading on Matrix here.
And I guess what I would do about it is that, and it's hard sometimes, especially in Northumberland County, to simply tell the truth in a way that is empathetic, and not to indict someone who believes in these things, but to tell them, okay, I understand why you see this, but unfortunately, this is not the case. This is not true. You're more likely to get struck by lightning than you are to commit voter fraud. The vaccine has been taken by hundreds of millions of people, and for the most part, you're more safe having it than not, because the coronavirus can kill you.
Less than 1% have side effects. Yes.
Yeah, and that's just side effects, right?
Right.
And so think of the consequences of not having it.
That's right.
And the other thing is that, I understand that you're scared that we're going to be telling white kids that they're bad and black kids that they're victims, but that's not going to be the case if you're just teaching someone about the Tulsa Race Massacre, which people in Oklahoma didn't even learn about. There's people who grew up right after the Tulsa Race Massacre who had no idea it occurred, black and white.
Right.
It's hard to do that because, like I said, is when you get a conspiracy theory, you get so turned up in it. But that's the only way you can. It's going to take not the president saying it, not some public official saying it, but communication with your friends and family. And that's sometimes very difficult because you get scared of ruining your own reputation with it. But sometimes it's a conversation that needs to be had. So, yeah.
Very good. Very good. Anything else you'd like to add, Michael?
I'm listening and I'm thinking about, how you were saying like rumors get spread around, and it just makes me think about how the same way people interact with each other at an individual level, person to person, it almost mirrors itself in the same way how countries interact, and how special interest groups interact, and how there's like this power dynamic to everything, even the most simplistic things. that don't need to have a power dynamic. Like the same way people spread rumors and lie, countries sow, mistrust and things. It goes on at every level of interaction. But that was just a thought I was having that was interesting. That got sparked by what you were saying about that. And again, just coming back to education, like, people not knowing about the Tulsa race riot and like the whole, I see the billboards, they're like, teach ABCs, not CRT. And I'm just like, this doesn't even, we're not trying to make white people feel guilty. It's like the Holocaust, right? Museums went up and, they said never again. And they were, people have to know that this happened so it doesn't happen again. How are we you have a whole portion of history that people do. You say certain things and there's zero name recognition. You bring up certain historical figures, zero name recognition. And, and I'm reading like 1984, right? In like English class. And it's like that going back and just blotting out like in the book, they would go back and destroy literature that like contradicted what, Big Brother was saying. But it's like, if we don't hear about it, the way there's zero name recognition for certain things, it makes it seem like that period of time has been blotched out.
If it's not on the internet, it's not true, right?
Right, exactly. And it's like, how do you expect us to be well-rounded and have context if you're not telling us the race in America is apparent? It's very obvious. And if it wasn't obvious, it was definitely obvious after last summer. So you can't say teach ABCs and not CRT because they're teaching it everywhere else. We're all talking about it. You're not gonna not having the discussion. I'd rather have the discussion in a controlled environment than have it a not controlled environment.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like you said, people didn't recognize race, they recognized it last summer. But unfortunately for George Floyd and that officer, it was already too late.
Mm-hmm.
George Floyd died and the officer was hidden in jail.
Right.
But imagine if they were kids, they had it, like Michael said, in a controlled environment.
Right.
The same goes for what Michael and I were talking about with women and children when it comes to things like a lot of what Aaron and Jane deal with in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office is domestic abuse and sexual abuse and sexual assault.
Mm-hmm.
There's no forum, no controlled forum, like Michael suggested we have, to have conversations about these things and to understand what it means to have a loving and beneficial relationship with someone of an opposite gender,
Mm-hmm.
Or someone of the same gender. Even then, just having a friendship with someone is not something you learn about, and that is something that needs to be cultivated, and it can be outside the home. But once you get to the case, if you're not going to teach it and you say, okay, people should learn about it on their own, once people get the opportunity to learn about it on their own, it's already too late. Someone's either going to end up hurt or someone's going to end up being behind bars, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, I agree that, yeah, if you're not going to have it in the controlled form, where else are you?
Yeah.
Where are you guys going to? So, yeah, I like that point that Mike told me.
Mm-hmm. So the last question that I have is, what can the library do for you? So, and that's not something you have to answer now. If you think of something, you're certainly welcome to email me and say, hey, Jane, I had an idea. I think we should do X, Y, and Z. And we're happy to do that. I know we need to have more conversations like this. It was really tough to get everybody here.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I don't know how to do that. I know everybody's so busy. Please invite other people anytime. More people can come.
Other people.
It doesn't have to be the original group.
No, I like the library. I mean, it's hard, like I said, for one, because you're competing against a larger system that is big and powerful and people and sexier, right? People pay more attention to it. But then you also have the fact that the library does so much already, and you don't want to lose focus on what you do, right? For the people who already do come to the library for these specific things.
One of the biggest things I've tried since I got here is doing more partner things with the school, like having the student library access card thing, which is done, and everybody, I've had students come in and check out books already under the program. In January, I'm meeting with both of the librarians. You have a new high school librarian, Cynthia, and then Sue. We'll get together again and sit down and talk about, you know, things that we can collaborate on and do together. And talking with Holly, and I have a great partnership now with Adam, Dr. Letizia. Is that how you say his last name, Michael? Is it Adam?
Yes, man. Yeah, Letizia.
Yeah, Letizia, that's it. He and I meet about once a quarter, talk about things, and we're partnering this year on the Black History Month programs with you guys and doing some stuff with you. Rather than doing a separate community thing, we're partnering with the school to do that. So that to me was really, really important, the partnership with the school. And I think that will make a huge difference. I purchased a video program that's good for the year, but through the month of February, we're going to show one video a week pertaining to either people who influenced Black history or influences in Black history. There's a bunch of different videos that you can watch. And I think that they're going to be showing them in your classrooms. So that's one thing that we're going to do. And then we're trying to still put the rest of it together and what that will look like. So hopefully I'll know more next week, and he'll be putting a committee together to talk about it. Well, is there something that you're missing at the school that we could provide here?
Not off the top of my head that I can think of, no.
Something to think about, though, for both of you. You know,
I will definitely think about that, though. I'm really trying to push trips and getting out, you know.
a field trip to your local library.
I would like that. And with that, you guys we could talk about how the library isn't just books.
Right. Well, that was part of the reason behind the student library access cards, because having your student ID tied to an access card for here gives you access to all of our electronic resources. So if you go online, there is so much. There's 24/7 homework help. There is job search, resume building. There's, oh my gosh, there's so much. But I think what I need to do is maybe make a brochure of some kind that tells you guys what is available to you with those cards. So I will do that.
Now, do you know if there's any editing software that is a part of any of those resources? Because I know one thing with the film stuff, they bought us some like the whole Adobe Creative package, but it's only on the desktops in the library at the school. So when school is closed, we can't really get in there to do that type of stuff.
Yeah, right now we don't have that either. It's so incredibly expensive.
Yeah, I do know that.
Yeah. So, but that's something I can look into.
Thank you.
All right, we're gonna have to wrap it up. So, any other comments, anything you guys would like to share before we close up shop? Any topics you'd like to address the next time we all get together?
Well, one thing I was just going to say is that if there's one thing I learned from EDI is that people are attracted to food. That's the way to get into the door.
I didn't get you guys any food today. I was going to.
Yeah, man.
Yes.
No, I wasn't saying for today.
So
How true is that?
pizza and soda would help.
Sorry.
I like that.
Uh-huh.
You know, you're right. Food.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you so much, you guys. I will be back in touch to for the next time to meet. And I appreciate you for getting on, Michael. And it's great to see you, Denzel.
Yeah,
Thanks for coming.
I'll see you, Michael.
You as well. See you guys.
We'll be talking to you soon, Michael.
Yep, soon.
I got some things coming up.
All right.